Namaste and greetings. I, Anshul Karnani, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabha एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI, where policy talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on the environment and the Union Budget 2023-24. This discussion is organized by the Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of the Environment Planet Talks. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget for fiscal year 2023-24 being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our chair for today's discussion is Mr. Ashish Kothari, founder member Kalpavriksh Pune. We welcome you, sir. And the moderator for today's session is Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and editorial director at IMPRI. We welcome you, ma'am. And the panelists for today's session are Mr. Soumya Dutta, Co-convener at South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Madhu Verma, Senior Economic Advisor at IORA Ecological Solutions, New Delhi. We welcome you, ma'am. Dr. Debadityo Sinha, Lead Climate and Ecosystems, Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Professor Shamla Mani, Senior Advisor at Waste and Waste Management, CEH, Public Health Foundation of India. We welcome you, ma'am. And we have Mr. Himanshu Shekhar, Senior Editor, Political Current Affairs, New Delhi Television Limited, NDTV India. We welcome you, sir. So now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Dr. Simi Mehta to start the program. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Good evening. On the 1st of February 2023, our Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, unveiled the Union Budget for the financial year 23-24. And this budget, in the words of Prime Minister Modi, has been said that it will infuse new energy and new momentum to India's development trajectory. And there are 7 priority areas or saptarishi on building a sustainable future through green growth, green infrastructure, green energy, and green jobs. And the solid foundations of a developed India in this Amrit Kal would be ascertained. So what are the nuances of the details of the impact of environment, impact of the budget on India's environment situation is going to be decoded today. And it is my warmest delight to welcome all of you. I welcome all of you and good evening. I hand it over to Mr. Ashish Kothari to take the session forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Simi, and thank you, Anshul, Jun, and everybody at IMPRI for this opportunity. We had a similar session almost exactly 1 year back. I think it was quite stimulating. I'm sure this one will also be very, very interesting, exciting. Some of the same participants, some new ones. So I'm also myself looking forward to it and learning a lot from our 5 very distinguished panelists. I think we will start first with Anchal. Are you giving or somebody is giving us a quick overview of the budget for a few minutes,
sir.
and then we will proceed with each of the 5 panelists talking for about 5 minutes each. We will then open it up for Q&A, the audience, and then come back to the panelists for some final round of concluding remarks that they might have. And then if I still have anything to add, I will do a concluding remark at the end. So, IMPRI, please go ahead.
Okay, so now we will move on to a brief presentation on the Environment and Union Budget 2023-24 that our team has prepared, covering the key highlights. So the Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has announced that Budget 2023-24 will focus on 7 key areas, which includes green growth. Moving on to the next slide. In general, green growth refers to the country's efforts to achieve economic development while also protecting the environment and preserving natural resources for future generations. And this year's union budget provides 35,000 crore rupees for priority capital investments towards energy transition and net zero objectives. And the government is targeting 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen production by 2030. Battery energy storage system with a capacity of 4,000 megawatt hours supported with viability gap funding will also be introduced. Now, the government has allocated adequate funds for scrapping old polluting vehicles and 19,700 crore rupees for National Green Hydrogen Mission, which will facilitate the transition of the economy into a low carbon intensity, is also allocated. Also, in order to ensure green growth, interstate transmission system for evacuation and grid integration of 13 gigawatts of renewable energy from Ladakh will be constructed, and an investment of 20,700 crores, including central support of rupees 8,300 crores will be made. Now, moving on to the next slide. Here are some budget estimates from the year 2021-22 to 2023-24, showing an increase in the total expenditure as well as capital expenditure. All these figures are in rupees crores. So there is also an increase in the amount allocated to Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change and Ministry of New and Renewable Energy with around 3,079 crores and 10,222 crores respectively. The scheme for faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicle in India, which was launched to encourage electric and hybrid vehicle purchase by providing financial support, also saw an increase in the budget allocation to rupees 5,172 crores. Now I pass it on to Tripta.
Thank you so much, Achal. Good evening, everyone. I am Tripta Behra, researcher at IMPRI. To take the budget analysis forward, to look at it from an environmental perspective, we will be looking at schemes and domains under the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now, as mentioned by the Finance Minister, the budget for the fiscal year 2023 adopts 7 priorities or the Saptarishi, and green growth is one such priority in this year's budget. So the allocations seen in the budget are also reflective of this approach. Now, as we can observe here, most schemes have seen a relative increase from the previous year's budget estimates. For example, if we take Pradhan Mantri Kisan Urja Suraksha Evam Uthan Mahabhiyan or KUSUM, a scheme which has been introduced for the installation of solar power and other renewable energy power plants, sees an increase in its budgetary allocation this year. Keeping this idea of green growth in mind, we also see new schemes being implemented this year, them being PM Pranam, Pradhan Mantri Program for Restoration, Awareness, Nourishment and Amelioration of Mother Earth, to incentivize states and union territories to promote alternate fertilizers and balanced use of chemical fertilizers. We also have Bharatiya Prakritik Kheti Bio-Input Resource Centers being introduced this year to further facilitate the adoption of natural farming. 10,000 of such resource centers will be established, and in order to develop a national level distributed microfertilizer and pesticide manufacturing network. Along with this, we have an introduction of Mishti or Mangrove Initiative for shoreline habitats and tangible incomes, Mishti for mangrove plantation along the coastlines and on salt pan lands. Moreover, Amrit Dharohar has been introduced to encourage optimal use of wetlands and enhance biodiversity. In addition to all of this, indirect tax proposals have been introduced to encourage green energy and mobility. Also, as mentioned by Achal, a substantial budgetary allocation has been made to a policy of vehicle scrapping for replacing old polluting vehicles to clean the economy. With that, we would like to wrap up this small introduction on the budget from the environmental perspective. Over to you, Simi ma'am.
Thank you very much, Tripta and Anchal, and thank you for giving this wonderful overview of the budget and its implications on the environment, especially. Thank you so much, and I will hand it over to Mr. Ashish.
Thank you, Anchal and Tripta, for this. It helps us to set the stage for, I think, as I said, what should be a very interesting discussion. So I think I will just make a few opening remarks before requesting our panelists to speak. Himanshu has also joined us, so welcome, Himanshu. So I think, as I think both of you have pointed out, there is at least on the face of it a lot of emphasis on green. I think the finance minister's speech had something like 20 or 25 mentions of the word green, which is probably the first time that's happened. And virtually the green, green has been put as a qualifier for lots of things: energy, farming, mobility, buildings, fuel, jobs, etc., etc. There's also a lot of what seem to be very positive ones, all the ones that you have listed, so I won't list them just now, with regard to organic farming, actually even Jal Jeevan, water, mangroves, etc. I think the questions we have to ask ourselves is, number one, what is actually contained in these budgetary allocations? What are the on the ground? Because it sounds very good is not necessarily what will finally appear on the ground, and this is something we would request the panelists also to enlighten us about. The second issue, I think, is how deep are the transformations. So, for instance, with energy, and there's a lot of focus on energy. There was also in the last budget, and is in this one. I think 35. But then, if you look a bit closer, most of it is to do with the oil and the petroleum sector. What exactly does it mean for these sectors is something to be analyzed. Also, if you look at green energy, 13 gigawatts from Ladakh. I'm actually sitting in Ladakh right now, which is why you see me wearing these clothes. So there is considerable worry and concern about this 13 gigawatts of solar energy, because 30,000 crores or something that's been allocated for the transmission and distribution of the power that will be generated. So both in terms of the power generation, which is slated to take place in the very, very ecologically sensitive and culturally sensitive area of Changthang, which is a nomadic pastoralist landscape and very important for wildlife, and all the transmission systems that have to go along with that. What would the ecological impacts of that be, and the social impacts is a question a lot of people here are asking. And then we have, of course, continued expansion of coal. So if you look at energy, while it sounds good on the face of it, you dig deeper, it may not actually be so good. And again, this is, I think, people like Soumya and others, I'm sure, will have much to say about this. The third issue, I think, which is there is, what is the impact of the real big ticket budgetary allocations, which are not necessarily environment, but have an impact. So for instance, the National Highways Authority of India, as in last year, this year has been given 162,000 crores of rupees. That itself is 50 times the budget of the Ministry of Environment. Now, we know agitations going on all over the country where highways are cutting through forests or cutting through people's lands. What does this actually mean? Similarly, with fertilizers, chemical fertilizers. So on the one hand, let's talk about prakritik kheti and things like that, and that's good. But on the other hand, chemical fertilizers get a jump from something like 105,000 crores to 175,000 crores. So where is the major impact going to be is, I think, a very, very big question. Similarly, I think there's a lot of budgetary allocations for marine exports, for the so-called Blue Revolution mission and others. Again, are these for conservation or are they for the commercialization of marine and coastal spaces? That's the question. Fourth, I think, crucial issue is what's missing or hardly there, which is, for instance, air pollution. Now, people have been signaling air pollution as a huge public emergency, as a disaster across the country, with maybe 1 million or more people being killed every year because of air pollution. Is there a budgetary allocation? Is it sufficient? Is, I think, one question. Secondly, climate adaptation. The economic survey has a huge chapter on climate for the first time. But then if you look at the budget, I actually, in a cursory look, I could not find very much on things like climate adaptation, which is so crucial for tens of millions of people who are already facing the impacts of climate in our mountain areas. In Ladakh, this is a serious issue as glaciers are receding. Villagers are actually getting abandoned because people simply don't have water anymore. In our coastal areas, our farming and Adivasi areas, etc. Again, I'm sure panelists will have other things to say about this. The fifth and final point I want to make is looking at predictions. So for instance, we might have all this thing on green growth, but on the other hand, virtually every environmental law in the country, including environmental impact assessment and clearance procedures, are being weakened and diluted in the name of ease of doing business. There's actually a good analysis by the Center for Financial Accountability on the budget, just came out, I think, or yesterday. And they've pointed out how many of these dilutions have taken place, hundreds, literally hundreds in laws that have taken place, most of them actually to reduce environmental or labor regulations. So on the one hand, you have this talk, on the other hand, actual measures, legal policy measures seem to be going in different directions. Similarly, if you look at Prime Minister Modi's favorite new phrase, life, and there's a talk in the finance minister's speech about curbing consumption or going towards more sustainable consumption. But then if you look at the entire economy and the advertising and all the encouragements that corporations are getting, it's all towards actually increasing conspicuous consumption and overconsumption. So I think these are fundamental issues that need to be analyzed to be able to really get into a deeper understanding of what this means. So with those few remarks, and the panelists will have much more expertise on all of these and other issues, I'm sure. I'm going to hand it over. I would request panelists to look at maybe three aspects, apart from what they're also going to look at anyway. One is direct allocations for the environment. There is a slight increase in the Ministry of Environment, for instance, or in, of course, then the second is indirect, such as with renewable energy. And the third is allocations for other sectors that don't seem to be related to the environment, but have a very huge impact on the environment, like highways. So with that, over to the panelists. I think we'll go with the sequence that was announced. So let me start with Soumya. Soumya has been very active on climate and a whole bunch of other issues. So I'm sure those are things he will enlighten us about. Soumya, over to you. 5 minutes, please. Thanks.
5 minutes. Okay. Thanks, Ashish, and namaskar and good evening. So since it is 5 minutes, let me be very brief. One, on the surface, there is good sounding noise on the environmental front, like the Ministry of MNRE, and this is almost 50% increase, green hydrogen, this all, as Ashish said, the green word has been used many times, and substantial increase in the budgetary allocations of those sectors which are supposed to be better, forget about green, supposed to be less evil than what was going on, supposed to be in some aspects. But let us put this in context. While the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy got 10,200 some crores, the Ministry of Petroleum Natural Gas got 40,000 plus crores. While the National Green Hydrogen Mission, the green hydrogen is being tom-tommed to very much. Green hydrogen target by 2030 is 5 million metric tons by 2030 per year. We have to remember today our petroleum consumption is around 240 to 250 million tons. And by 2030, it might be 400 to 450 or even 500 million tons by the targets that are being presented. So there is a huge noise about green hydrogen. But if you place 5 million metric ton against something like 400 million metric tons, because one of the issues, and since it's supposed to replace coal in some areas, where in steel production, etc., and liquid fuel in some other areas. So that is insignificant. Whether you do this 5 million or not will really not have any impact. The third point, what Ashish pointed out, there is a huge number of projects which are getting clearances, whether it is a linear project, so no EIA, whether it is a project in the defense strategically important area, 100 kilometers within the international boundary, no EIA needed. And some rough estimates showed that something like even few of these projects, something like 2.3 million trees, full-grown trees will be cut. But other estimates are showing this is a far, far, far higher estimate. And if you now quickly turn into what are the requirements? One, there are two things that I will quickly, since the time is so short, will focus on. One is India's international climate commitment or pledges. There's no commitment actually, so pledges. India has committed to or pledged 2070 as net zero. Net zero itself is a big farce, but forget about that. Even if 2070 you have to do, on November 2nd, Finance Minister announced opening up auction of 141 new coal mines. There was a recent news that Ministry has said that 2023, the indigenous coal production, that is domestic production, will exceed 900 million tons. So if we are opening up a huge coal and oil sector today in the mid 2020s, how do you go to zero or net zero by 2070? Because if you have to go even by 2070, of course, the climate systems will not wait for 2070 for us or for 2060s for Jinping or for 2050 for others. But we have to start reducing right now if we have to go to even effective zero by 2070. Instead, we are actually increasing at a very fast rate. The last point, I don't know how much time is left. The last point I would like to highlight is, since I am working with a large number of communities across India, whether it is the coastal fish workers, the inland fish workers, the street vendors, the coastal communities, and the mountain people. And I just came back from Sundarbans 4 days ago after working with them. Every year, the impacts are increasing, not only on coastal people, not only on the central and dryland people, but nobody has talked about what happens with nearly 4 crore street vendors when an year sees 4 or 5 heat waves, extreme heat waves. How many thousands of them are dying? How many lakhs of them are falling sick and losing income? How many, this year means the last year, 2022, you might remember that wheat production crashed by 20%. February, the prediction was bumper harvest. April, the production crashed by nearly 20% by government's own estimate. The reason? 3 heat waves. So 2023 is very likely to be worse because the El Nino is coming back after the unusual triple dip La Nina, which is going to end by May or so. That's the projection. So what is the government's preparation to help something like 80 to 90 crore people who are at the cutting edge, who are at the front line of climate change impacts, whether it is heat wave, whether it is urban or rural flooding, whether it is flash floods in the Himalayas because the glaciers are melting and melting very fast, whether it is those extremely strong storms. And all of us know that the Arabian Sea has now become much more active. The Arabian Sea over the last around 20 years, the number of cyclones has increased by 52%. And that's all because of climate change. The Bay of Bengal was always there as a highly cyclone-prone area. Now we add to Arabian Sea. And in the last 3 years, we have seen Taute, Nisarga. The western coast is completely unprepared. Given a little bit of preparation on the eastern coast, if you go to the western coast, including Mumbai or Ratnagiri, big cities, they're completely unprepared. So what does the government propose to do? Nothing in the budget, not even being mentioned anywhere, except you see some World Bank funded or GCF funded small projects going on in 4 districts in 4 different states. Some transferring the electricity lines from overhead lines to underground lines. Those are small things. But what do the communities do? What do the fish workers do? Roughly around 2 crore coastal fish workers and their families. What do they do when repeated cyclones take out 25 to 30 days of their fishing time? Out of the 180 to 190 days of fishing time available, what do they do if 25 to 30 days are taken out? What do the people, inland fish workers and coastal fish workers do with this temperature rise, the deoxygenation that is taking place and the acidification that is taking place? Is there any measure the government is even aware? There is no recognition that these things are happening. So I'll not prolong this. I'm saying there is good noise, but noise is always noise. You have to have a main signal. And noise can ride over and under, so you can try to find out what are the noises. What we are seeing now is good noises. The main signal is going into a completely wrong direction. That is business as usual with, as I said, little bit of green noise. So this budget Because of the increase in GST incomes, this budget has allocated more money. So that do not really reflect on the priorities of the government. So that's a very unfortunate fact. Thank you.
Thanks, Soumya. And I think we'll come back to you also a little bit more on climate, because that is obviously one of the most important factors that is facing not just India, but the whole world. There doesn't seem to be adequate recognition of this in the budget or in the overall planning of the government. Madhuji, over to you. Your 5-6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Ashish, and thank you for the previous comments that really set the tone, and what has already been covered. I would rather say, in fact, we discussed last year as well, a couple of things came up for environment sector, and this year just further augmented and further accelerated. It's very important as well to, when the budget comes up, I think the way we write we are all variety of people sitting here, academicians and all academic professionals. So when we write an international or national paper, we always have some keywords for any publication, and then accordingly weave our entire story. I think it is very important when such declarations are being made, and as you rightly said, Ashish, we have direct effects, we have indirect effects, and we have lots of so-called cancellation effects happening because of you promote something here, but the other activities such will pull the initial activity down. We talked about conservation of natural resources at the same time. Highways are being created, and maybe it will have a negative impact on the resources. So I think we should weave the budget to incorporate all these elements togetherness and try to see that they don't have cancelling effects on each other. And I would also say, being an ecological economist working on these domains for a very, very long time, and some schemes are very, very interestingly introduced, and we have been engaged in doing a huge amount of work in agriculture in my past organization. I just switched to IORA Ecological Solutions on 1st of February, and before that I was working in WRA, and both organizations, we work a lot in agriculture and can see lots of things happening, and new schemes have come up in terms of providing digitization of the entire agricultural system, digitizing public infrastructure as well, and definitely national cooperative database to be created. Then whole value chain needs to be looked into. Maybe sometimes it so happens that we just confine to increasing the production, conserving the ecosystem, but not look at the entire value chain of it. I think that's what needs to be taken into consideration, because they have got huge implication on so-called decarbonization of the ecosystem. We are greatly into decarbonizing agriculture. So every stage needs to be looked into. I think that focus has been now is I could see happening in this particular proposal. But at the same time, this year being this decade being the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, I think there is a lot of initiatives to restore, talking about wetlands, mangroves, forest, and we talk about agriculture, and all our ecological systems, definitely. And it is the International Year of Millet, so we are promoting, and lots of things have come up in terms of declaring Center of Excellence of Millets at Institute of Millet Research in Hyderabad. And the Honorable Finance Minister talked about Sri Anna, which has been a traditional, staple food. All the millets have gone from the scene, and what is called as so-called wheat has increased, and wheat bellies have increased. So we need to actually promote this, and this budget totally supports, all variety of, so-called millets into jowar, ragi, bajra, kodo, kutki, many such millets. What I also would like to say, it's also when we talk about green budget is a financial, sectors, the description of the whole allocation of resources and usage of it, but we must also do green accounting at the end of it. Nothing in finance completes with the accounting part of it. So whatever we introduce in a year, it will have an impact, and things will happen at the end. Like if you're conserving ecosystems and you're restoring ecosystems, you're building soil, you're conserving biodiversity, you're doing, millets definitely do a lot of nitrogen fixation and the climate resilient crops, the superfoods, and so much of nutrients. At the end of it, we must actually quantify the impact of these interventions on the ecosystems and the economic system, on the health of ecosystem and the health of economic system. I think that is not being done. That will give a very strong guidance, system for future. They will give you an idea about what interventions which were introduced in the beginning of the financial year had led to certain changes in the end of the financial year. The incremental change, the value added must be actually taken into consideration. And if there are cancelling effects, the net value will be definitely very low. It might become, in fact, negative. So that's what is not being done. I think that will give us a reality check at the end of it, a mirror to see the value of interventions and I've been working in this with CR framework, the system of environmental economic accounting, for a very, very long time. And it's a high time in India to introduce this. And come on, we have a structure available. We were in the committee and developed the structure, and we have had a couple of sporadic cases studies available. But on the whole, the country should know the reality check should be done at the end of the financial year, which we get in terms of economic survey. But at the same time, the invisibles don't get any recognition or position or accounting in the economic survey of the country. So that's it's high time to, if you want to really green the economy, go for green accounting at the end of it. Budget is something to introduce green interventions, but the net change, incremental change or decremental change can be assessed at the end of it and give us guidance for next year to actually proceed and accordingly make suitable interventions, so not having, as Ashish is very concerned about, having cancelling effects of initiatives which have good intent but land up with the bad outcome. So that's what I would just say at this particular point. Thank you.
But Madhu, and we'll come back to you. I think especially on the issue of millets, I have this question, and maybe you can deal with it later, is how much of this whole millet thrust is for exports and how much of it is actually for the poorest families of the country, including the marginal and small farmers. I think that could be a very important thing to look at, because I know there was, for instance, recently an international seminar on millets. And virtually all of it was corporations, companies, big farmers, and exports. So I think that's a very crucial question. Maybe you can respond to that later. I'm going to turn over to Debadityo. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. So in 5 minutes, I will just try to summarize like the changes I have been able to see. So obviously there are certain, I will say silver linings. For example, we have seen several times the minister mentioning about green growth. First time I heard that she talking about wetlands. I think this there was one scheme she announced, Amrit Dharohar, to protect 265 wetlands. The Mishti scheme, they announced about this mission for this plantation around coastal region. But this also raises some questions, because with the budget, you have to also see the how these schemes will be implemented. Okay, and also this budget gives you a fair amount of information how the previous budget were utilized, because see, in every budget you will see there is a revised budget column as well. So amount which was originally approved and what is the revised budget of the particular ministry, particular scheme. So I would like to start from that, because I think that the amount of money which any particular ministry is able to utilize also helps the government decide that which sector needs more fund and not. So obviously in this budget we have seen several reshufflement between the schemes. For example, Project Tiger, Project Elephant is merged. There were components on environmental awareness, on climate change action plan, National Adaptation Fund, National Mission on Himalayan Studies. They have been transferred to a broad category called Secretariat. Okay, I will come to that to more into it. And similarly, SACON, Sully Mellon Center for Ornithology, is transferred under WIA now. And similarly, we have seen many several heads been transferred to different areas. Now, here are certain concerns which I could I haven't gone to detail, but there are certain things which I just want to put in front of the panel. One is that in several of the schemes, we have seen that ministry was able to utilize, they were heavily underutilized. For example, this national Environment Protection Management System Development Fund, this scheme was last year budget allocated 142 crores, and they were able to utilize only 93 crores out of it. Similarly, for various schemes, I just name those schemes. I don't have to give the numbers. Project Tiger, for instance, it was allocated 300 crores. It was only able to utilize 188 crores. And under different heads, even this development of wildlife habitats, 42.5 crores were allocated. They were able to use 25 crores. So now, and also you must be knowing this project Cheetah introduction. So the amount was made from Kamba and Project Tiger. So people have also raised questions that how amount which is meant for afforestation and Project Tiger can be used for Cheetah. So now merging this kind of projects in a one grid also gives them more like discretion to spend the amount as they want, and several heads are under secretariat now. I don't know, but like how you will be able to track where the money is going. The other thing I wanted to say is that, which we already covered, that the focus is on the energy sector. I think some 20,700 crore is also, they have, the minister spoke about something called renewable energy evacuation program. And this includes also this 135 gigawatt power plant in Ladakh. And interestingly, she also mentioned during the budget, I was seeing the budget, she said that 800 crores out of it will be from center and rest will be made from public private partnership. So that means we are going to see more private investment in those sectors. Yeah, green hydrogen fuel like this 90,000 crores is already there. There is another head called energy transition towards net zero for Ministry of Petroleum. It is 35,000 crores. And there is also a component of 10,000 crore per year for sustainable cities for tomorrow. And the focus will be on urban infrastructure development fund, which will be with the state governments, and it will be for targeting tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So obviously it also shows the priority of the government, like, how they want to develop, and all this kind of stuff is there. And lastly, I just want to say, in the budget document of the MOF, I can see they have mentioned that the majority of the amount for the plantation will come from National Sovereign Fund, Green Sovereign Fund. Okay, this is something which we need to understand, we have to see. And one last thing I want to say, while she mentioned about this, Minister mentioned about this Mishti scheme, she said that we want to plant mangroves. I don't know, only the name is Mangrove Initiative, or they will actually plant mangroves. But the thing was that she said that we will plant forest along the coastline. Now, see, we have seen how plantations are a disaster in the country. We have been planting trees everywhere. And she mentioned this thing called salt pans. We will plant mangroves or trees along the salt pans. So, what we have seen in last several years, whenever the government brings some scheme, there is a whole rat race to, get the money from center. Another interesting thing, one last thing, sorry, I won't take much time. There is a component for state grants, like grants given by center to state, that is also underutilized. Last year, the ministry didn't allocate those monies for state, and there was also a report from of the committee on that, why they couldn't. So my only submission is that we should not only see the budget, what has been approved to the MOF or any of the scheme. Sometimes these are also affected by the amount of money you were able to spend in the last couple of years. And that also shows the priority of the government. So we should definitely compare not only the amount allocated, but also the amount they have been actually able to spend, and what is the impact of this reshuffling, and what is the reason behind those. Yeah. Thank you, Ashish. You are muted, Ashish. You are muted.
I think there's an issue with his internet. I think it's stuck. So
we can go to next panelist, Simi. Yes, please go ahead.
We can go on to Professor Shyamla Mani.
Thank you, Simi. Thank you, IMPRI. Yeah, I would like to, since I have been focusing largely on waste management, there are a few things which has made me happy, or made the sector where I'm following happy, and some things which we are very concerned with. One of the first things is that I would say that definitely we are happy that bio-CNG is being considered, because I'm also looking at the infrastructure in cities, and this is the the kind of recommendations that we had made, that segregation of waste at source, and especially the wet waste, and that going for the making of the biomethanation plants, and through that the bio-CNG. And this is for two reasons. The reason is, hi Ashish, I started speaking because I think you were kind of frozen in your screen. Yeah. So I was saying that, in the waste management sector, we are very happy that, a certain amount of funds, especially the GST paid biogas, that will definitely encourage the waste management, and especially the bio-CNG, where the wet waste will be segregated. And fortunately, the Indore experiment, where the 550-ton bio-CNG plant has shown that a city can be made to segregate all its wet waste. And also, from the mandis, they consolidated the 2 earlier plants and they made it under the Govardhan project. And she announced that they were going to make about 100 Govardhan projects, and it has been allocated. And in this, I would also like to bring your attention that actually, compared to Brazil, we have been rather slow. Brazil, with 49.7% of non-fossil fuels, has almost 34% where they are using, bioenergy, bioresources. It could be waste, it could be even agricultural waste and those kind of things. And whereas India, with hardly 26.7% of non-fossil fuel, hardly 10 to 15%. So this, we feel that will give an impetus, and it's also infrastructure for our urban areas, which is really required. And under Swachh Bharat mission, we really struggled very hard to create this kind of demand for utilization of the wet waste, which was one of the biggest reasons for the methane. And as you know, now COP27 also had a focus on the methane emissions from the landfills. So if this can create a certain amount of impetus, it can also provide both energy and also especially street lights. Many of our cities are struggling with their non-payment of bills for energy utilized for street lights. And this has been found that many of the cities have been able to not only use it for transportation purposes, but also this is a very big guzzler, in the revenue expenditure of a city. So this is one area that it has created a little bit of impetus in the urban area. The second point is the thing that she mentioned about the smaller cities and the sanitation, where she said that we are going to make it machine, especially instead of manual scavenging and manhole cleaning, it should be machine hole cleaning, which is really a social justice issue as well as a sanitation issue. Of course, the amount allocated, 10,000 crores, might sound big, but this requires because we have 4,000 cities which are less than 1 lakh population. So it would not only just require the purchase of these kind of equipment, but also a huge training program. Of course, it is going to be done under the UIDF, and I'm sure the NSKFDC also will be playing a very big role. But the biggest issue here is the identification and training of the waste workers, especially the erstwhile manual scavengers, and in a business model. So we are really looking forward to it, but I don't know how this is going to roll out. We certainly hope that this will really create that kind of change that we are hoping. Of course, the points where everybody has also mentioned that, even in urban areas, we are very concerned that air pollution, especially because NCAP has come and there are, identified cities which are non-attainment, and they require not only just a lot of equipment and training. Of course, they have mentioned things like ethanol blending and, change of the fuel, fossil fuel, but that is not the only thing. We also require allocation for, urban infrastructure, especially for using some of these, alternative energy sources. And also air pollution is also about monitoring. It is also about, a lot more other kind of infrastructure that is required for controlling. And it is not only transportation. The It has been shown very clearly in the source apportionment that also, MSMEs, they continue to use polluting fuels. There are also various other sectors like waste burning. Of course, no impetus has been given or any kind of push to the industries to create alternatives to things like plastics, because those are one of the things which are being burnt openly in areas, in urban areas. So I don't know whether my 5 minutes is over, but initially these are the kind of remarks that I would like to make. We are happy about certain things. It is showing certain amount of allocation. But in the health sector, we are very disappointed because climate change and health is a very important aspect. And we feel that there has been nothing, absolutely nothing said or, about it. And like many people have pointed out, there are many people in the country who are suffering from the allocation of funds for climate change and health. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamalaji. I'm sorry, my internet is just going in and out. I'm going to try and switch to another system, but Himanshu, please go ahead.
So please unmute.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes,
sir.
Okay. It's a privilege, Ashish sir, and all the learned speakers before me have delineated very well the broad contours of what is there in the budget, what is not there. I wanted to share some ideas about some of the ground reports I did during the COVID period and how, because I was also reporting for NDTV, the budget provisions that have been made, the reactions of the stakeholders. There was a clear context in which this budget was presented. I wish to take all of you back to 2020. And in 2020, when the budget was presented, just 1.5 months later, there was a lockdown announced. And then we saw that in April, the GST collections fell to 28,000 crore, a huge 82,000 crore decline vis-a-vis April 2019. And what also happened in April 2020 was that all the new announcements, including those to address challenge of climate change that FM had made in her budget speech in February 2020, were put on hold. The implementation was stopped because the revenue resources that the state needed to attain those goals, to implement those policies, that was simply not there. And now when the economy is back on rails, India is now one of the fastest growing economies, there was a greater expectation that in the COVID period, because of the debilitating impact of the lockdown on national economy, not only in India, in different parts of the world, there was very acute concern about the ability of the state to attain even the sustainable development goals. Lots of initiatives that was initiated by governments all over the world. The ability of the state to actually garner the resources required to continue addressing the challenges and the implementation of different national and state policies, that was very badly affected. Second, of course, we saw during the COVID period, India was hit by a series of cyclones. And we do know that because of climate change, the intensity, frequency, and the scale of disaster incident is rising. And as a correspondent who also does research on disaster management, I'm actually surprised that in the budget speech, the word climate change, the word disaster doesn't even appear. But there is a new focus, and I think that this is the first time I've heard any finance minister speak so much about green growth, that she has actually listed green growth as one of the 7 priorities of her government, as she called Saptrishi, guiding principles of this budget. And so green growth, broadly, there are 9 parameters that she has outlined. There's one more ground report I wanted to briefly share, is about the electric vehicle manufacturing. Now, I did a ground report that in 2020, the number of electric vehicles sold in India was 1,39,000. By 9th January 2023, in the present financial year, the sale of electric vehicles had increased to 8,44,000. That is 507% jump in the sale of electric vehicles. That is, of course, very good news as far as reducing our import dependence on crude oil. But at the same time, the Society of Electric Vehicle Manufacturers, they had actually put forth 3 demands in their pre-budget memorandum before FM. One, she has met. 2, there is no mention of that. One, of course, the import. She has actually exempted the customs duty on import of capital goods and machinery required for manufacture of lithium-ion cells for batteries used in electric vehicles. Now, the CII National President Sanjeev Bajaj told me that this is the most expensive equipment that is used in any electric vehicle. So if the customs duty is exempted, that of course has a very significant impact on the cost of electric vehicles. And I think because in comparison to conventional vehicles, the electric vehicles still are more expensive. So I think this of course will add up and encourage more people towards this sector. Now, of course, some of the points have been made by learned speakers before me, but these 9, of course, areas which FM has mentioned, it also includes vehicle replacement. Now, there was one demand that the electric vehicle manufacturers had made was that we want a battery swapping policy, because there's always a concern that if you buy an electric vehicle and if you have to do interstate travel, you're a little unsure about how you're going to charge your batteries. So they desperately wanted the Indian government to actually announce a battery swapping policy. And they were also, they have been indicating this, that like petrol pumps in different parts of the country, you need to develop that network where under the battery swapping policy, it is possible for those who drive electric vehicles to get charged electric batteries wherever they go. But that infrastructure, of course, will take a lot of time. And the third was a battery manufacturing policy, but that also has not been mentioned by FM. But what did she do? The budget for Environment Ministry increased by 24%, but it remains, I think, as Ashish has said, very minuscule, 3,000 crores. It was 2,478 crore last year. So on the budget front, energy transition, 35,000 crores, the point has already been made. Green hydrogen mission, cabinet had approved this, an allocation of 19,700 crore. Third is the green credit program. Then the fourth one is green mobility. One I have already mentioned, and one to avoid cascading impact of taxes on blended compressed natural gas, that is CNG. Excise duty on GST paid compressed biogas contained in it has been exempted from excise duty. So this is to boost green mobility. This is one has been a focus area in this budget. Now, changes in central excise, another tax concession in order to promote green fuel. Central excise duty exemption is being provided to blended CNG from so much of the amount as is equal to the GST paid on biogas, CNG, compressed biogas contained in the blended CNG. And vehicle replacement policy and encouragement to actually replace the old government vehicles. And the government now wants state governments also to come out with an incentive package under the vehicle scrapping policy, which was announced in 2021-2022. I think this is also a welcome step. Interstate transmission system for renewable energy. Ashish has already mentioned, this is for Ladakh. Special scheme from Amrit Dharohar for protecting vital wetlands, another point that has been made. And importantly, 1 crore farmers to be facilitated to adopt natural farming in next 3 years. For these 10,000 bio input resource centers will be set up. So broadly, the thematic focus has been on promoting green fuel, green energy, green farming, green mobility, green buildings and green equipment, and policies for efficient use of energy across various economic sectors. So that is the thematic focus when FM mentions the government's focus on green growth. But of course, there's so much more that I personally expected as a researcher who researches on disaster management, that there are still so much more that needs to be done in terms of, in fact, protecting the poor who become victims of disaster every year. On climate change, for instance, there was a lot that needs to be done because last 2-3 years during the COVID period, a lot of national effort to actually attain these SDG goals, especially Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which deals with climate change, that needed a much bigger push than what I do see in this budget document. Thank you, Ashish sir. I think my 5 minutes are over.
Thank you, Himanshu. Thanks to all the panelists. I'm sorry I've been going in and out a bit, but so I might have missed some of your important remarks, but I will get back to them with the recording. So thanks a lot for all of this. I would like to now request if there are any questions from the audience, and if the IMPRI team could help me with tracking those questions. Soumya, I'll get back to you in a second. Let's just see if we can get any questions from the audience, and then we'll have another round with all of you. Anchal, Tripta, Simi, any questions from the audience so far?
No, not yet, sir. But Soumya sir has raised hand.
Okay, Soumya, go ahead, and then we'll get back to the audience if there is any questions. Yeah.
Briefly, I would request everyone to actually look into the what actually the proposals do mean. Like a lot of noise has been made, and even Himanshu ji also talked about the EV program. Today, if we go by government data, roughly 70% of our electricity comes from coal in India, 70%. And if you go by government projections, at least 50%, which is going to be much higher, because the target announced of nearly 500 gigawatt of renewable is not going to happen by 2030. The rate is nowhere near that, the rate of achievement per year. But even if by magic the government achieves that, that means the government plans, even by 2030, at least 50% of your electricity will come from coal. The coal to electricity efficiency is roughly 23-24%. Sorry, 33-34%. That means per kilowatt hour of electricity, you have already emitted nearly 900 grams to 800 to 900 grams of carbon dioxide. So just by plugging your EV into the electric point doesn't reduce your carbon footprint. On top of that, instead of going for public transportation, focus on public transportation, each EV will be weighing something like 1,000 to 1,300 kilograms. The steel, the aluminum, the plastic, the batteries materials of lithium and nickel and everything, each and every one of them has a carbon footprint, has a water footprint, has an ecological footprint. And we all know, if we go for good public transport, a good bus can replace something like 20 cars, where most of the people drive around in single in one cars. So I think these noises, as I said, the green noises on a brown budget is a lot of people are being misled. Similarly, I'll just end by saying this, I'll not prolong, there are a lot of other points. But if we look at it, most of the focus that has been shown in the budget is electricity and a little bit of industrial energy supply. But that's insignificant. As I said, from 450 million tons of oil and 1.2 billion tons of coal, if you replace by 5 million tons of hydrogen, that's as good as non-existent. So that's good to see, but it's non-existent in terms of total impact. But one has to understand, in India, the electricity we consume constitutes roughly 18% of our total primary energy. What are you doing to reduce the impact, the climate impact, the water impact of other energy sources that Indian society is consuming? You are talking a lot about electricity, solar power plants. The solar thermal is a non-starter as of now. There is a little bit of support this budget. That's welcome, but we need much more. So I think we need to delve a little deeper. We need to see what's behind the scene and not just be led by what is being announced. Thank you.
Thanks, Soumya. I think those are very important points. Also, I think Surya has in the Q&A pointed out that 30% of EV by 2030 requires large resources of rare earth minerals. Is there any plan to secure these earth resources? Himanshu ji, maybe we can come back to you in a bit on if you want to respond to these issues. There's another question also by Surya about 10,000 crores for sustainable cities. How can cities access these funds? So maybe Shyamala, would you like to take that on, because you also focused on cities?
Yeah. Actually, it says here that the Urban Infrastructure Development Fund, UIDF, is the one which is going to do it. And the UIDF will be managed by the National Housing Bank. This is what has been given in the budget. I guess the only way to leverage these resources is through the grants from the 15th Finance Commission, is what 15th Finance Panel is what they have said in the budget. So 15th Finance, the way they have sort of designed it is that the cities have to show certain capacities, and they have to show that they have this kind of particular infrastructure, and also what are their policies and all that. So there is a like a particular specific way that cities can access through the 15th Finance Commission. And also I have a feeling that because it is through the UIDF and also the, as I mentioned, the NFKDC, the sanitation part of it, I think they can access through Swachh Bharat mission to some extent also. I don't know whether I've answered the question, but.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Shyamala, for that. Is there any other question already? Otherwise, we can request Himanshu to maybe specifically respond to Soumya's points. Okay, Mani Prakash has asked Debadityo a question to you. So Himanshu will come back to you about the mangrove plantation budget allocation and its disastrous implementation by state government. Could you please elaborate on this point? Debadityo?
Yeah. So actually, I just raised a doubt. So the scheme's name is Mangrove Initiative for Shoreline Habitation and Income, Tangible Income. Now the point here is that it's a myth that planting trees is actually solution for everything. Obviously, where there are mangroves, you have to protect those. But there is also importance of plain beaches. Like a lot of these turtles and all, they like it's a habitat of many species which prefer those kind of plain things. And we have seen it inland also, every places. It's like there are grasslands, there are scrub forests which have their own system of flora and fauna. It's in the bureaucracy and also with the foresters. So because there's so much amount of money into plantations, like you've seen in the case of Campa. So much amount in like they have to spend and every time you see that in the February to March in most of the states we have seen, there's a huge plantations programs like during those years because they want to spend the money. So what happens is the areas which are actually very rich in biodiversity, take for example you can take example of any like grassland places in the first areas. So they see these areas are like place where they can plant trees. So when you plant those trees, they this local like biodiversity, like they're adversely affected by those kind of plantations. So similarly, I think it's not that all the coastline has mangroves. There are places where there will no mangroves. There will only beaches. There will only salt pans. Okay, so you don't want to plant mangroves everywhere. And I don't know whether this scheme only talks about mangroves. It can be about trees. And we have seen this case of this Isha Foundation. They have launched this huge program on plantation along rivers. Now you cannot plant trees along river banks and on floodplains and say that you are protecting environment. So wrong intervention at right place, like good plantation is good, but only for a particular cause. It's not everywhere you can go. So I just raised a doubt that what happens is whenever government promotes something, then all the states on all the machinery they just jump over it. Like we will get money and there's a whole rush to do that. That is the thing I wanted to tell. Yeah.
Thanks, Debadityo. There's also the issue, of course, that while they might be planting mangroves in a few places, they're also giving clearances in areas where mangroves already exist, natural mangroves that have grown over centuries. I mean, including the Nicobar right now with that absolutely insane project that it's 70,000 crores is going to be spent on. So there are all these contradictions also which do exist. Plus, of course, a huge thrust to ports, to shipping facilities, to all kinds of coastal things, which are going to be causing huge impacts on the coastal ecosystem. So how much of that actually gets balanced by this nicely sounding Mishti scheme is a big question. Back to the issue of electric vehicles, because there's also a question by Shipra on whether the shift to green energy electric vehicles is ensuring social justice. And I think Along with the points Soumya had made about electric vehicles, there is also, of course, the point about who can really afford these electric vehicles. So these 8 lakh that I think Himanshu you mentioned would probably be the 1% richest people in the country who can afford electric vehicles. Whereas, as Soumya mentioned, public transport, which is what 50, 60, 70% of people in cities would be using, does it actually get the same amount of attention? So Himanshu, maybe you want to respond to these, both Soumya's points and this question about social justice.
Yeah, this 30% target, of course, that is the government plan. But it will depend on how India's big car manufacturers actually take the next big step. I was just looking at the data. Maruti, which had a share of around 41.8% in December 2022, and of course, we all know Maruti Suzuki is the market leader. Its first electric car itself is expected in 2025. In fact, the Maruti Suzuki chairman, R.C. Bhagwa, has been on record saying things about electric vehicles, electric cars, and how there was a lot more needs to be done before actually we start producing the electric cars. So there's always a question of infrastructure that I think will be a big bottleneck that needs to be addressed if you have to achieve these 30% targets. Because a company like Maruti, if it launches its first electric car only in 2025, then of course there are challenges in the road ahead. Second, of course, the point that I earlier made is about the battery swapping policy. Remember, most of these vehicles that we see, on the website of Society of Electric Vehicle Manufacturers, there's a data given from 2017 till 2023, and you can see that there is a very significant jump in the sale of vehicle. And most of these, another story I did, is in this smaller segment, like, for example, a scooter. Swiggy, for instance, has made a deal with Zippy, and Zippy is making electric scooters only for Swiggy. And it's easy to maintain, easy to charge. The input cost is very, very low. So I think with the advancement of technologies and with the kind of custom exemption that has been announced in this budget, and more such announcements and concessions by the government, the cost of electric vehicles is expected to go down, because lithium ion, if you exempt the custom duty on the important components and in the import of lithium ion cells, then of course the cost goes down. But of course, this is a very new sector, and I think it needs government's handholding. And at the same time, the big manufacturers in India, especially Maruti Suzuki and other such companies, will also be, I think, needs to be encouraged, needs to be given more incentive, because this is a demand and supply driven economy. I remember I interviewed the executive director of Maruti Suzuki, and he was very hesitant to even speak about electric vehicles, because Maruti, of course, is not as aggressive in this market, in this segment, as Mahindra is or Tata Motors are. They have taken far more steps than what Maruti has done. So I think there are still big car manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers, who are still hesitant, because for you to create a market, you need an infrastructure. Now, there is a thinking that you first start producing cars and the infrastructure automatically will come in place. But there are other naysayers who would say that why would somebody buy an electric car if you can only drive in cities and you can't take it out? This is the problem that happened when the CNG had first come. And most of the CNG run vehicles, the people who owned that, they were finding it difficult to go for interstate travel, because in many states, such CNG stations were not available. So I think there's a question of infrastructure that needs to be addressed. But of course, as Soumya was also saying, there's a lot more thinking also needs to go in terms of how to make public transport systems more and more aligned with the EV segment. I think that is one big jump that needs to be taken. And also you have to address these issues and concerns that he had raised. They're very valid points that also you have to address. But at least in comparison to fossil fuels, of course, electric vehicles on the face of it seems to be a better option than a petrol or a diesel car.
Thanks, Himanshu. I think Shipra and others have also made this point about, for instance, where does lithium come from and what are the ecological and human rights implications of that? This is actually a question that's being asked globally, because as Europe and the US also shift in a big way to electric cars, the question of where is the mining and what are the impacts is a very, very big question. And I think we also need to ask that, because the bigger the economy India becomes, the more its global impact is going to be, including in things like electric vehicles and so-called renewable energy. So these are important questions to be addressed. Let me switch to two other points that have been made. One is by I think Naitri, about large allocation for oil palm plantations. And there is in fact a lot of ecological and social concern about oil palm plantations. With all the evidence from Southeast Asia that we have, the fact that India is going in a big way into this is a matter of great concern. Does anybody want to take that on? And then we'll come to the issue of green credit that Shivani has raised, which is also a question that I have. But on oil palm, any quick comments?
May I quickly comment?
Yeah.
See, this is very well documented, particularly in Malaysia and Indonesia. The devastation that oil palm has done, oil palm plantations, is not only monocultural, the amount of water needed, the amount of chemicals that goes into, the amount of deforestation, the amount of loss of biodiversity areas. So all these are very well documented. So I think today the Indian government coming out as if this has never been done, they're doing a great thing. Everyone understands that India faces a huge shortage of edible oils, but there are a whole set of edible oils apart from mustard and tin and others, which are available in India. Many of the oils that are going out of use because there is no buyer. The government support do not exist. So instead of massive scale oil palm plantation, and in India, see, if you compare Malaysia or Indonesia, the population density and forest area available per 1,000 square kilometers is far, far, far higher in both Malaysia and Indonesia. And here I would also like to go back just a short while, because this oil palm plantation, there is such a huge lot of literature of devastating impacts. But these kind of plantations, I think one of the panelists also mentioned that Brazil is so ahead of us. I'd just like to mention a fact about the similar kind of monoculture plantation for bioenergy. When in 2003, the US announced the blending policy, ethanol blending policy, the land conflict, there is one study that I remember, there are a number of studies. The land conflict and the number of land conflicts and the amount of land under conflict, both in Brazil, went up dramatically. And today, a large part of Amazon deforestation, one part is for beef, one part is for sugarcane for ethanol. So I think none of these are as simple as do this and this will be done. And let's not forget, Brazil is more than 2.5 times our size, roughly 1/7 our population. So more than 16, 17, 18 times, our population density is that much. So, or 10 times, more than 10, 12 times. So for India, going for large scale monoculture plantation for this kind of oil will be disastrous, both for ethanol blending and for palm oil.
Thanks, Soumya. I think Nagaland is one of the biggest targets apparently, and that's going to be a lot of ecological concern indeed. Let me switch to this question about green credit. That's another announcement in the budget. I don't know if there are any details, because what was announced was that it will be inserted into the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act. But exactly what does that mean? I'm not sure. Does anybody on the panel have any clearer idea of what these green credit program would be?
Not a very clear idea, but it basically, I think it is trying to say that climate conscious industries, if they bring in resources and they adopt sustainable practices, then they will be given this green credit. It's like it's not like carbon credit where you actually have to go to and do carbon trading, but this is, something within the country that is under EPA, Environment Protection Act itself, you get it. So I think it's some kind of an internal credit system rather than, the carbon credit system.
Well, I have the...
Just like to...
Sorry,
okay.
Madhu had raised her hand, and then Himanshu will come to you. Madhu, go ahead.
So just like to substantiate what Professor Shamla had said about the green credit program. Of course, it is basically there's a lot of talk about changing the behavioral aspects of all sorts of stakeholders in the system. That's what the budget also talked about greatly. And to incentivize good behavior, to incentivize, kind of circular economy system, to incentivize sustainable development, to incentivize kind of, system which is more environmentally benign, more responsive, more responsible actions are being taken by individuals and companies and firms. This green credit scheme is all about, because to promote that, because otherwise EPA definitely tries to capture these kinds of various direct and indirect impacts. At the same time, we always talk about the negative part of it, the negative impacts need to be captured, but people who do conservation, who actually promote environmental sustainability. In fact, our entire argument when I was working in the Institute of Forest Management, we work on behalf of ministry this time to make a case of environment, forest and climate change for the 15th Finance Commission. You may be knowing we worked for the 14th Finance Commission and greatly contributed towards changing the entire formula. We started work from the 13th Finance Commission from IFM to 14th and 15th. And we wanted to change the entire behavioral aspect of people. We have polluter-based principle, we have all kinds of regulations and taxes and all kinds of penalty mechanisms, but we don't talk much about incentivizing. We talk about greening the system. Unless you incentivize, it will not happen. Secondly, let me just add what Debadityo also talked about, and also Mr. Dutta talked about the system what we are following. In case of mangroves, I would also like to suggest, in fact, we have been talking a lot about in forestry ecosystem as well. I did the NPV report for the government, and then we said that the whole CAMPA thing, which is the money which goes for various activities, we lose ecosystem services when an ecosystem is diverted or used for some other purposes. It is an ecosystem which gets degraded. We must recreate the ecosystem. Not plantation is not just answer. It is a whole ecosystem. 3-story plantations are required, not just so-called trees to be planted, grasses to be looked into, the microorganisms to be looked into. The whole soil needs to be built. That is ecosystem. Same thing actually should be happening in mangroves. It's not just sake of plantation. It is an ecosystem. We must look at the habitat of fisheries and nurseries of fisheries and a couple of other aspects to be looked into, and how they have a huge kind of potential for assimilation of waste of various kinds. And also look at the native species plantation. We just go blindly follow what happened in some other place and may not be suitable. It should be more localized, more native species to be promoted for that particular sake. And that's what happens in case of oil palm case as well. It is not just plantation. You must look at the entire ecosystem, how to impact the entire ecosystem of the region. So when you're doing oil palm plantation, look at the other species plantation which build the soil, which check the kind of pollutants which will be coming out of oil palm plantation like that. So this is the holistic way of looking into it. We just look at one lens and then try to provide the answer.
Yeah,
multiple lenses to be used and holistic response should come for these interventions. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhu. Absolutely. I'm not sure how that's going to happen when, for instance, 130 square kilometers of rainforest in Nicobar are deforested and compensatory afforestation is happening in Haryana. There's no question of any kind of ecological restoration there. But yes, so but the important, you have made a very important point that it should be a holistic restoration and not just single plantations. Himanshu, you wanted to add something quickly on the earlier point, or have Shamala and Madhu covered the point about the green credit?
Actually, the green credit program, when the budget comes up for debate in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, after the parliament meets after recess on 14th March, we'll know more about this when she shares more details in this. But I do have the transcript of what exactly she has said in Lok Sabha. For encouraging behavioral change, a green credit program will be notified under the Environment Protection Act. This will incentivize environmentally sustainable and responsive actions by companies, individuals, and local bodies, and help mobilize additional resources for such activities. Yeah. That's all she has said. But I think once the parliament meets again after recess on 14th March onwards, and it comes for debate, I think we'll know more about what she's planned.
Yeah, okay. So we'll wait and see what comes out of that. Okay, I'm going to now, because we have about 10-15 minutes left, I'm going to now come back to each of you as panelists to give us any concluding remarks you have. I'm assuming there are no further questions to be responded to. So if you could just in 1 or 2 minutes have some concluding remarks, and I'm going to go in the reverse order now. So let's start with Himanshu, you.
I think the point that I made earlier, I just thought that this is something that needs to be done. I remember in 2020, budget, there were lots of announcements on climate change and environment. And then suddenly 2 months later, all the implementation of these schemes announced in budget were stopped. Now, we do not know whether they have actually revived the process of implementing them. But I think in the 2 years, 2020 and 2021, the ability of the Indian state to actually take very firm action to address the challenges we face on the environment front was actually considerably weakened because of the fall in revenue collection, and there was a lot of stress in the economy. We know economy contracted in 2020, 2021. And so I think this has been the period of acute economic distress, both by at the government level and at the people level. We know millions of people had loss of income also during this period. So now when the economy is back on rails, I just thought that we have to be very aggressive, because not only in terms of addressing the SDG goals on different segments, if you look at it, but even in the context of taking new steps, newer and more aggressive steps, that UN Secretary General has said one line repeatedly, the most number of times, I think, last 2 years, is that climate change is running much faster than we are. And we still don't see. I remember Mr. Dr. Harshvardhan said in Lok Sabha, he was a science and technology minister, that in 2016, the number of cyclones that hit India was 1. In 2017, it rose to 3. By 2019, it had risen to 9. And I know that during the COVID period, I remember we have had to fight disaster on 2 fronts. There was a COVID war against COVID, and at the same time, we also had to fight natural disasters, climate-related disasters like cyclones, where an NDRF DG told me that my soldiers, my men have to fight 2 wars at the same time. And I was forced to issue orders that even in cyclone shelters, we can't keep more than 50% people than what they were actually meant for, because we have to maintain social distancing. So the challenges are growing on the disaster front, and I think we need to do far more than what we have done actually to address the challenges on both climate change front and disaster front.
Thanks, Himanshu. That's a very, very important concluding point you've made. Over to Shamala.
Yeah, thank you. Surya, one of the participants, has said about cities being very crowded, and whether the master plans address this. Yes, that is exactly what I was saying, that, under climate change and also under air pollution, many cities, they aspire for this kind of a thing, that, you have more green area, or you have, green lungs and things like that. But actually what we are seeing is that the amount of land which is, really set aside for this kind of a thing in urban areas is actually reducing. Even today's newspaper has that even Delhi's forests and green covers are actually balding because of encroachment and various other things, and deregularization. At one point of time, you say that it is green, green belt, and then you suddenly find that within a month it becomes yellow belt or some other belt. So this is something that we have been really trying to bring the attention to, and especially if you're going to address things like microclimate and how it affects helps us in the in health aspects. Also, there are no especially for the non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases, you need these kind of open areas where you need for walking, even in fact access to even sidewalks and paths, and all that is a very big problem, and they are all actually connected to air pollution and climate change. So this is something that we are really concerned with, and especially we were hoping that there will be something on heat action plan. And also the amount of money that is really required for disaster management. You ask a state like Orissa, how much they have to spend, not just on constructing shelters, but, after that also. And like it was pointed out, the western coastal areas, they have not even considered all these kind of things. And, now they are looking at it completely in a new light. So definitely, it's a good thing that they're talking about organic farming. They're talking about impetus to, these kind of fertilizers, organic fertilizers. And we are hoping that, the composting activity that we are trying to promote in urban areas, that will create some amount of demand, and even the rural areas will benefit. But just saying that is not enough if you don't decrease the subsidies in chemical fertilizers, because that is that I think Ashish already mentioned right in the beginning. So definitely we are extremely concerned in these aspects, and we sincerely hope that through the green credit system or through other means, and somehow the industries realize this, and also, like I said, alternatives to plastics and packaging is becoming such a huge issue. So that also requires attention.
Thank you, Shamla. Here in Ladakh, plastic waste is a massive issue, and they're planning a new airport with a capacity of 2 million people. That's 6 times the population of Ladakh. So you can imagine what's going to happen if we don't take care of these issues from right now. Debadityo, any concluding remarks?
Yeah. So Ashish, I just want to just give some suggestions, like the way budgets are made in this country, and because environment is a very different subject than other, like finance or economics things. It has often very long-term impact. So somehow the system of budget is actually working. So it is not favoring the environmental conservation, because what happens is you have the budget and you have to act within those scheme of budget. So if it actually like it does not incentivize any like innovation. Because someone has to do something like very in their own area. So first of all, like there has to be more transparency in budget. It has to be more participatory, at least in terms of environment, because it affects everyone's life. It affects the country as a whole, and it doesn't only affect the human beings. It also affects the natural resource, the ecosystem, and the wildlife, everything else. So it has to be more participatory. And there has to be some accountability of the government. Like, if they're creating a budget which affects the environment, then there must be some reasons. So I think a couple of years ago in the same program by IMPRI, I said this thing about this ACIA. This full form is it's called Strategic Impact Environment Assessment. So whenever you plan any project or any big things, then you do some strategic impact assessment, that whether this thing is required or not, and whether we can do it in some other way. So this is one thing I want to say. And also only thing is that we need to evolve this whole mechanism of at least in terms of environment, that to make it more transparent, accountable, and participatory, and also not only people but also the state, because every state has different needs to do that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Crucial points about also local people's participation and the federal structure of India and how states need to be. And I think here a big question, which of course we can't deal with right now, is the shift from a 5-year planning process to now this annual kind of thing has possibly reduced pieces for participation, because people cannot be participating every year in these massive exercises. So then it becomes very centralized. Yes, Madhu, your concluding remarks, please.
Yeah. So continuing with what you left my points with a question that about millets. Basically, you said how it is responding to the so-called nutritional security of the farmers who are actually growing millets. So this is being this time introduced, or rather highlighted and stressed upon. And for millets, not just they grow for others, they also have consumption for themselves. Like in the study that I have done for flagship study on doubling farmers' income in India, we try to look at various kind of interventions which are happening across the country. For example, we studied the entire model of organic farming in Sikkim state. It is the state is organic, not the individual farmer which gets an organic kind of a certificate. So lots of such, I would say there are very good intentions of introducing these things. We have been asking about them for quite some time. They've come into being, but at the same time, we must also look into what everybody pointed out, missing links of really being able to make these schemes impactful on ground and have people's participation for whom you actually made the entire scheme. If you don't have their participation in the process, then nothing will happen. But what I would admire for a few things, that highlighted the role of circular economy. We talk so much about just transition, circular economies, and this has been our practice millions of years ago, and then we have been having for many years. If you look at our own system and look at the historical account of the country in various Vedas and various other Kautilya's, it just talks about variety of forests and how we are able to reuse, recycle what is called as waste. So waste is a resource. It's not just kind of a waste, it's a resource that can give you much larger return. So when we are actually doing a circular economy, we are going decarbonization, we talk about prakritik kheti, organic farming, millet production, organic cotton, all these are figuring in the entire budget. And we studied these models actually in our entire work of 3 years. So there are missing links, and that links can be bridged with adequate finance, which of course is being talked about a lot in terms of various kinds of credit schemes, various kinds of incentives to come into being, how we can create a kind of accelerator fund for agriculture, for example, to bridge these gaps. The links to be bridged, and ultimately it is a matter of incentivizing. As I said just now as well, as the previous speaker spoke, that if people are making efforts, we must incentivize them. Like very pertinent question was raised that chemical fertilizers have got a subsidy, not the organic fertilizers. But do we talk about nowadays, Co-convener scheme talks about a couple of galvanizing organic bio resource done, and creating these centers of production, converting waste to wealth, and not just using in so-called these agricultural sites. But I would just add to Shamlaji's point of this entire planning of urban areas and talking about sustainable cities. I remember teaching this model of Santa Monica, I think 20 years ago in my master's program of IFM of sustainable city. One thing which may be transportation, where we talks about housing. It was about each and everything, how to sustain that. So this is kind of, I will again come back to the point of holistic development. And in this case, maybe urban farming is another important component, and laying down, the planning in a manner that you don't disturb your natural resources. We talk about a lot of blue-green, resources in urban areas. So this is what need to be actually further augmented and to be, again, I would say holistically looked into, and to really achieve this model of sustainable, cities, and looked at ultimately the sustainable development and conservation of agriculture, the whole agricultural system. One quick point I'll just like to mention.
Madhuji, we'll have to.
So much about, this is gender aspect. Gender aspect also. Gender aspect.
Please finish.
This program. Just quickly, we haven't heard much about the gender aspect. We talk about millets. It is the women actually who are cultivating millets mostly in the country. We have seen in the case. So this is need to be further, strengthened. The gender-based, the women groups which are engaged in this. This is required a lot of strengthening in future, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, Madhu. Soumya, last word to you.
Okay, I'll see this as again a failed exercise, a missed opportunity. What we needed, given what we are facing today, both in terms of climate, both in terms of biological diversity being wiped out, and 30% of India, as per ISRO, that nearly 30%, 29.2% of India undergoing desertification. The government knows all this. The government knows that our biocapacity has been exceeded within India. I'm not talking about the global biocapacity only, which we have exceeded in the mid-1970s. In India, the total productive capacity of the land and the sea and the whatever is ours, we have exceeded that. So if we need to grow, we need to grow for people who are at the bottom. We don't need to grow, and we cannot grow without further degrading, whether you go for electric vehicle or whether you go for solar energy. You cannot grow without degrading the nature within India further. So the only avenue left is redistributive growth. And the government is completely unwilling to even to imagine that this is possible, and this is the only way to go. I would think that second point, any government or any institutional structure, if they want to address a problem, they need to first identify the problems first and be honest, admit that these are the problems. And trying to bypass saying that we are having green growth in transportation and having more airports, which are 5 to 7 times every flight by passenger kilometer is 5 to 7 times as carbon intensive as even the AC trains. We have much less infrastructure. We have given infrastructure funding to trains, railways this year, but railways, the trains for the poor people have been reduced, have been continuously reduced from early COVID times. So we need to really fast recognize what is going wrong, realize that natural capacities even within India have been exceeded, and we cannot keep on growing indefinitely at whatever 6%, 6.5%, or 5.8%, whatever is the ultimate figure, without degrading it further. So let's look at who are enjoying far, far in excess of their rightful things, and let us see whether the majority of the people. So the budget this year, that's my last comment, is very good for people at the top and the middle classes, some of the middle classes, not all. Tax cut, etc., and green car. A person at the bottom, or even a middle class person, 13 or 14 lakh rupees Nexon, Tata Nexon, I cannot, or probably I don't know you, I cannot offer to buy, and I won't buy because it's not environment friendly. So the government, when it is making the budget, it needs to look at the 80% of the people who are beyond the radar now. So it has again been failed. This population of 80% of India out of 141 crores have again been failed. We are again looking at the top ones. And if you look at most of the proposals, these are for maximizing the profit of big capital, not for minimizing the risk from climate change, from food insecurity, from health of the majority of them. That needs to be changed.
Thanks, Soumya. So I think absolutely important, and I think nobody's mentioned this here, but it also has serious repercussions, is the significant slash in the budget of the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. It seems this government basically wants to do away with the whole thing because it was supposedly a Congress scheme, but they can't throw it away. So they're actually been substantially reducing the budgets, and that also points to a point that Soumya is making about redistributive justice and what happens to the 80% who are at the bottom of the rung, economic rung. I think there's been some incredible points made by all the panelists. There's no way I can summarize this, and I won't attempt to do it. We're already also over time. I just wanted to conclude with 2 or 3 quick points. One, I think many of the panelists have pointed to the fact that there are some positive elements in this budget. The fact that green has entered the budget may be seen as positive. And there are some specific sort of allocations on waste and Prakritik Kheti and things like that, and wetlands. But if you look at the overall picture, there is no fundamental transformations that seem to be taking place in terms of greening the entire economy, which also requires looking at issues of social justice, redistributive justice, etc., and then asking questions of things like, if you're going to make so many highways all across the country, is that even ecologically sustainable? Or do we focus on other forms of mobility? The question of private transportation versus public transportation. So these are all issues where environment intersects with social justice very closely. And of course, a big point all of you have made about the virtual absence of climate disasters and other forms of disasters, allocations for that, which is actually very, very, very shocking to my mind, given all the evidence that we have. Everybody knows that, including it's been pointed out in the economic survey itself. So why are there not allocations for this is a huge shock to me, and I'm sure to all of you. And so I think, well, here we are. I think the issue of participation, which Debadityo raised and is also very crucial. And I think also, Madhu, you talked about women, the gender issue. Millets, is it going to focus on for instance, 5,000 Dalit women farmers in Telangana who have created an incredible revolution with millets, but focused on their own domestic consumption first and the market second? Is that the focus, or is the focus to create a lot more millets, to produce a lot more millets, but for export? And for people like me who like to eat ragi chips to consume in our cities. And I think these are going to be very crucial questions to look at as we look at the implementation of this budget. So just a few quick points I wanted to make there. Thanks again to IMPRI for this opportunity. I'm sure we will also get opportunities to discuss a lot of these issues further and to go deeper into them. If any of you are writing essays and articles on these, please do circulate them. I think you can send them to IMPRI and they can put them up on their website and also send them to us, because we need to keep learning more and more, exchanging more and more, and asking very critical questions of our government on these sorts of issues. Thanks. Over to you, Simi. Are you including? Yeah. Or
Thank you,
Anjali?
sir. So as we come to end of today's discussion, I, Anshul Karnani, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development and IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute for today's deliberation, a panel discussion on the environment and the Union Budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our chair, Mr. Ashish Kothari, moderator, Dr. Simi Mehta, and panelist, Mr. Soumya Dutta, Dr. Madhu Verma, Mr. Debadityo Sinha, Professor Shamla Mani, and Mr. Himanshu Shekhar for taking part and enlightening us. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's celebration. You may also find more discussions on environment in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, the State of the Environment Planet Talks, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you're watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We also invite you to IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget, fiscal year 2023-24, being organized from 2nd of February to 7th of February 2023. Wishing you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very